short agenda tonight of going over the sacrament of marriage. We'll talk a little bit about the upcoming rite of election. We'll also, I might as well, since today is Fat Tuesday, the final day of ordinary time before the holy season of Lent begins tomorrow, might behoove us to talk a little bit about that as well. But before we do any of those things, we ought to call to mind that we are in the presence of the Lord and that we should invite Him into our hearts and into our minds and into this room this evening. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good and gracious God, you created us to know you, to love you, and to serve you. You created us body and soul. And for that reason, you dispense your salvation, your grace, in the seven sacraments. Through the outward signs and the interior realities that the sacraments give to each of us a taste of the heavenly reality that is to come. Please bless our discussion. Please bless our search for you, the truth. Help us to overcome any obstacles that would keep us from drawing ever closer to you. And help us as we draw nearer to our great feast of Easter, our preparation period of Lent, that we may turn away from all that would get in the way of our relationship with you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay. So again, we'll be talking today about the sacrament of marriage, and of course anybody who's ever seen The Princess Bride can't help but think of that immortal phrase at the very beginning of the wedding scene. And I just only learned today that I just figured this character was just named the bishop because he's very much dressed in Episcopalian garb, but his actual name, according to the script, is the impressive clergyman. So also works. That also works. But of course, his wedding homily begins. Marriage is what brings us together today, right? So, but actually, there's some real truths about marriage in that movie, which we'll get to here in a second. So this is a sacrament, and it's a little bit. It's got some similarities, of course, with the other sacraments, but it's also got a little bit of a difference as well, which we're going to talk a little bit about. But before we even get into things, we need to call to mind that the church recognizes various states of holiness that a person might find themselves to be in. I shouldn't say might find themselves, but might willfully elect to choose. And one of them, which we talked about with the Sacrament of Holy Orders, is what is known as the sacerdotal state, or the priestly state, where a man accepts the call of God to be a deacon, priest, or bishop, as the case may be, and to serve the Lord in that way. That is a state of holiness that is imparted to that person who chooses and is called to that particular state. Another state is known as the religious state, or what might be called the consecrated state. These would be what we talked about with those who take the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, the monks, the nuns, the sisters, all in that category there. Those would be in the religious state. And then there's what's known as the marriage state, and that is the state of holiness for those who choose and willfully select to enter into the sacrament of marriage. So that is what we're talking about today. That third one is this, and it is a state of holiness, and that is, I think, sometimes maybe lost in certainly lost to the secular culture. What what marriage ought to be. And I have to say, just in my own personal journey, that it was this idea of marriage as a pathway to holiness. One of the best ways to learn about how to be holy is to study the lives of the saints, right? And there's all sorts of saints, men, women of all ages, different walks of life. A lot of them happen to be in the sacerdotal state. A lot of them happen to be in the religious state. We can all think of many who fit in that category. Often don't see as many in the married state, although, in recent centuries, I feel like the church has really kind of, canonized several more of what would be called the married persons and those who are in the married state. Of course, Exhibit A with those in the married state are those in the Holy Family, Joseph and Mary, of course. So that was kind of a call to me because I lived single up until my early 40s, actually. So I was doing pretty good. I felt like, hey, loving the Lord, doing some good stuff, but I felt like I'd hit kind of a bit of a glass ceiling in my own personal journey. And the Lord revealed to me over time that, and also I worked in a school, worked with a lot of families, kids, and there were many, many times when I was like, whew, boy, didn't I make the right decision? Not getting married. Look at how tough these parents have got it. What a difficult situation they find themselves in. And again, nothing really extraordinary most of the time. It was just hard, living the married life. And the challenges of parenthood, the challenges of being true and faithful to your spouse. Boy, hard work. I had it easy. I kind of felt like, as a single guy, I had some of the enjoyments of family life at school, working with kids, working with families. But at the end of the day, it's like, well, see you guys tomorrow, and I could go home, But again, just something lacking in my heart. The Lord, the Holy Spirit, pushing me in the direction that, this is what's going to get you over the mark. This is what's going to get you closer to me. And so I opened myself up to that possibility, and lo and behold, the Lord made that happen. So very exciting. But I would say we tend to think of the married state as something that is maybe not as high as a holiness, perhaps, as the sacerdotal state or the religious state. It's best not to think of it in terms of rank. Certainly there's pride of place to the sacerdotal life and the religious life for sure. But without the married life, there's nobody to fill in the roles of the sacerdotal state. There's nobody to fill in the roles of the religious state. So really, as we'll see, these different states of holiness complement one another and are, actually point to each other's reality as we go along here too. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide here. And we'll be talking about. You can just press the space bar.
Oh.
There we go. All right. So, and one thing to keep in mind is that matrimony is considered a sacrament in the Catholic Church, and this is not the case in many other Christian denominations. And the purpose of sacrament is really twofold. It's ordered towards the good of the spouses and the procreation and education of offspring. So this is its purpose in the divine plan. It's designed for the good of the spouses who choose to enter into this covenant, and it's for the procreation and education of offspring. Otherwise, marriage divorced from this concept isn't really marriage as God intended it to be sure. And this covenant between baptized persons has been raised by Christ to the dignity of a sacrament. Now, we talked about earlier in our course of how a sacrament is something that's been instituted by Christ. You might be thinking, marriage existed long before Jesus walked the earth. Of course, that's true, right? So, how is it that how could it be that Jesus instituted marriage as a sacrament. So we have a different way of, this is part of the reason how, as I was saying before, that marriage is a little bit different from some of the other sacraments, and that, yes, marriage certainly did exist a lot earlier than Jesus, and we'll see all the way back to the very first chapters of Genesis as well. But Christ, what he did was he raised it to the level of a sacrament. He elevated marriage. You could even argue that he restored marriage to what God had originally intended marriage to be, as it's described in the first few chapters of Genesis. And so, by Jesus doing this, he actually connects it very much, and we see also in the teachings of St. Paul, the letter to the Ephesians, and how Christ's sacrifice is lived out by Christians who choose the married state in the self-sacrifice that husbands and wives have for one another. So this is what the sacrament of matrimony is that we're talking about here. So do you have any questions at the outset here? Okay, let's go on to the next one. So marriage in God's plan. It's been pointed out that marriage is all over the scripture, and you could even say that marriage is at the very first beginning of the Bible and at the very end of the Bible. The book of Revelation ends with what's referred to as a nuptial feast, the wedding feast of the kingdom, right? And of course, there's all sorts of references to marriages, weddings, throughout the entire Old Testament and New Testament, of course. And we'll talk about some of that here. So, marriage in the order of creation. First of all, it should be very clear that marriage comes from God, right? And so, this is something that's established very much early on in the book of Genesis, right? We have the two creation accounts, both of which point to some real important realities about marriage. First of all, in the first chapter of Genesis, the first creation account, we have God on the sixth day creating human beings, men and women, male and female. He created them, right? And this is something that is essential to our very nature as human beings, is that we are created male and female, not one better than the other, but on equal terms. God blesses them, tells them to be fruitful and to multiply, right? Just like he had done to the other creatures that he had created, right? And then the second creation account, Genesis chapter 2, we see man and woman created separately, right? Man's created, all the animals are presented before Adam. He gives names to each one. Adam finds, all these animals is nice, but he didn't really have that proper partner, right? God notices this. What does he do? Anyone know? How did God create Eve? Yes?
From one of his ribs.
That's right. So he cast Adam into a deep sleep, and then taking out one of Adam's ribs, constructs a woman from that. And it's a beautiful, beautiful image, because what does Adam do when he sees Eve? He sees her as an equal. Finally, flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone. This is the proper partner for me, right? Unlike these other creatures that God has created, right? And so that, again, points to this initial idea that God has behind marriage, is that this is supposed to be a loving partnership between one man and one woman, right? And that's exactly how it started off. This is before the fall that happens in chapter 3, right? Which we've also gone over in the past as well. So that's how God set it up. Monogamy is even implied there, even though like the exact rules for that maybe don't appear word for word in chapters 1 and 2. They're certainly pointed to, for sure. And so, as a result, like I said, this natural affinity that Adam and Eve have for one another, it indicates that this idea of marriage is written on our very nature. That this is what is part of what makes us human. It's part of what's called the natural law, which we've also talked about. This is this innate sense of right and wrong that God plants into each one of us. And this is why we've seen in every culture, of every time, in every place, marriage of some sort has existed, right? Now, maybe not always to the ideal that God pointed to with Adam and Eve, but all the same, this is something that is written into the fabric, the DNA, if you will, of what it means to be human. And so again, God established it to preserve and to build up the human race, be fertile and multiply. And again, it implies an equal partnership. Woman is not created to be Adam's slave, right? It's very important to understand. So God creates Adam and Eve out of love, and then we too, in turn, are called to love as well. And man and woman were created for one another. But then sin enters the equation, right? And just like it ruined things for Adam and Eve, it ruined what marriage ought to be as well, too. So sin is what causes this disorder between man and woman. That really is one of the things that Jesus came to fix, not only to fix our eternal salvation in heaven, but also for our salvation while we live on earth, in harmony with one another. And we need the grace of God to re-achieve this unity that God intended for people to have, that Adam and Eve did have before they willingly threw it away as part of the fall. And so we see marriage continuing on throughout the rest of the Old Testament and the law and Israel, and Moses comes along, and there's all sorts, you can read through Leviticus, there's all sorts of rules and such with marriage that goes on there. We won't go into all the details there. So the penalties of sin are offset by marriage's help in overcoming selfishness to opening oneself to the other and self-giving. God gives us marriage so that we can learn to be less selfish and more directed towards others. We're called to love God and to love our neighbor. And so for a lot of people, anyone who's in the married state, the first neighbor that we're called to love is your spouse, right? And so that is part of the reason why God created marriage, is to help us learn to look outside of ourselves all the time and to look towards others and to look towards God. And by choosing to love others, we in turn choose to love God. All right? And then, again, all throughout the Old Testament, we see beautiful examples of marriage in the books of Ruth, the book of Tobit. The book of Tobit's a good read if you haven't ever given it a read. But it's a wonderful tale of a young man who chooses to get married and falls along with God's plan for him in his life, and ends up bringing honor to not only himself and his bride, but also to his family as well and to his people. And of course, the Song of Songs, of course, is usually interpreted as a wedding nuptial poem of God's love for his people and his people's love for him. So that brings us now to the New Testament and marriage in the Lord. So again, as we saw here, the covenant between the Lord and Israel is described as a nuptial covenant. In fact, it was sealed with blood out on Mount Sinai, right? And oftentimes, too, because of Israel's unfaithfulness to the Lord, God had to send prophet after prophet over and over again to point out to Israel, you're not being faithful. You are breaking our marriage covenant. But even though Israel was not faithful to that, God always was, right? And that was something that he illustrated many times throughout the Old Testament scriptures. This, of course, foreshadows, it's a type of the nuptial covenant between Christ and his church, which currently exists today, right? And that is also described as a marriage arrangement, a marriage covenant between God and his people. And so that is one of the reasons why the church is so talks so highly of marriage and has such a great regard for it, because they see the sacrament of marriage and the marriages that Christians choose to live as a direct reflection of Christ's love for his church, and in turn, the church's love for God as well. So, then as we see here in this stained glass window here, we have this sort of institutional moment where Jesus is present at the wedding of Cana. This is something that many of the church fathers pointed to as the time, the moment, if you will, when Jesus really does elevate marriage, which had existed, of course, for a long time before Jesus came along, really lifted it to the level of a sacrament. And again, we see in our Lord's hidden life, with the Holy Family in Nazareth, how Jesus comes initially, even before he gets to his public ministry, to restore the family, right? The Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Jesus didn't come as a 30-year-old and started walking the earth the way the first Adam did, right? He was never a child, right? But Jesus comes as a baby, intentionally, to show the blessedness of children, what a lovely and holy gift they are, the blessedness of marriage between Mary and Joseph, of course, are pointed to. And so, just in this hidden life, Jesus just living the ordinary life with his parents in Nazareth, right there is just a beautiful blessing of what marriage was intended to be by God in the first place, right? And then we come to the wedding of Cana, and Jesus is invited, Mary is invited, the apostles are invited as well. And so, again, the church fathers see in this that Christ desiring to be present in all weddings, in all unions between a loving husband and wife, right? And Jesus, of course, has that beautiful encounter with his mother, who comes to him. What does Mary request of Jesus at the wedding of Cana? Does anyone recall?
Making the water into wine.
Right. So this is an example too. Most of Jesus's miracles, it involves life and death situations, or Jesus curing someone of a pretty serious malady like being deaf or unable to speak or blind. This miracle didn't really need to happen, right? It was a little embarrassing for the couple, right, and perhaps their families for sure. But nobody's lives were at stake here. They probably would have had a wonderful marriage after all of this, after this little embarrassment of not having enough wine for the wedding feast, right? But Jesus intervenes anyway. First of all, the intercession of Mary, powerful, right? First, Jesus didn't seem like he wanted to do anything because he didn't really want to make a big scene. He knew that if he did something, people would start to know. The cat would be out of the proverbial bag at that point in terms of who he is and what he came to be. And but Mary was very much just like tells the servants, do whatever he tells you. Those are our Blessed Mother's last words.
So why did he do it then?
Why did he do it?
Yeah.
Because he wanted to do it, because he did not want shame to come to those people. Because it would have brought shame to them, right? You ever have a big party and not have enough food for everybody, or not have enough for people to drink? That's kind of embarrassing, right? Is it any different now? Imagine, Father, on Saturday night, if we didn't have enough food for all of our guests.
That'd be a problem, yeah.
Very embarrassing, right?
So do you think he wanted to please the couple more than he wanted to please his mom?
Well, I don't know
No.
Jesus's full intentions. I think Jesus wanted to do all those things and more, right? He wanted also, I think, to place his blessing upon this marriage as well, right? And part of the marriage isn't just strictly the wedding itself, but everything afterwards as well, right? And which is why there's a celebration of this is something that is to be celebrated, right? This is something that we see in all cultures as well. And again, the connection in the Bible of heaven being like a wedding feast, the wedding feast of the Lamb to his church, right? So in this way, Jesus is foreshadowing the abundance that is going to come about as a result of his wedding to his bride, the church. Yes, ma'am.
I kind of wanted to address, just in things that I've read, there's a theological interpretation that Mary is very sensitive to our needs, and she goes to her son so that and advocates for our needs. So in my mind, Jesus is putting things in proper order, and that pleasing his mother or doing what she has asked of him is to reassure us that he will always respond to his mother who advocates for us.
Jesus fulfilled the law perfectly, right? And the 10 Commandments, commandment number 4 is honor your father and your mother, right? Nobody fulfilled that better than Jesus. He honored his father in heaven. He honored his mother on earth as well. Father? Yes.
Yeah, and along those same lines, what both of you were saying, maybe to connect it. In the scriptures, wine is a symbol of God's grace in many times in the Old Testament. And so, like just as you were saying, Mr. Laddie, elevating this sacrament to this wedding to the dignity of a sacrament, the abundance of the wine that Christ produced as well was meant to teach that any married couple in need of God's grace could turn to Christ and to the Blessed Mother and receive an abundance of that help. Grace is the help of God, and joy and abundance to strengthen and solidify the love that they have for one another in marriage. And so ultimately, why did he do it? All of the reasons that you've mentioned, but also to tell every married couple, if you turn to me by the grace of this sacrament, you will find an abundance of God's grace, joy, and love for one another.
And just to throw out there, maybe a step back from what you said, and I agree with 100% everything you said, but Mary asked Jesus to help them, and he said, wait a minute, it's not my time yet. But he does it anyway, at her request. And so like Becky was saying, I think it's because his mother requested it. He wasn't necessarily ready to do it. He knew he could, but he wasn't ready. But at his mother's request, he did it.
And
Well,
what it says,
if you want to dig even deeper into that passage, it goes back to the nuptial imagery of Adam and Eve. So Adam calls Eve woman, and in the scriptures, Jesus calls Mary woman at that instance, and it's like, why is it that he's not calling her Mary? It's back to that same restoring the nuptial imagery of Adam and Eve, and he asks Mary, what is this to you? Do you know what this will mean? In the Greek, do you know what will come of this? And Mary goes ahead and says, do whatever he tells you, because he knows that at this he will be parted from his mother in his public ministry. Do you really know what you're asking for? Mary helps to intercede to begin Christ's public ministry, because she knows that his public ministry is even more important than having her precious little baby home to take care of and dote on and whatnot. But that is a reflection, because sometimes Protestants will say, well, look, he's disrespectful to his mom, Mary can't be that important. That's not what's happening in this passage at all. He's hearkening back to the very beginning when Adam calls Eve woman for the first time, and that nuptial covenant is solidified in Genesis. Now it's being renewed, strengthened, and blessed by God's grace in this particular wedding feast of Cana.
Right. Now you can see why this is a favorite of the church fathers, because it's so rich, so dense of meaning, so dense of all these different things that we've just been discussing here. So I like to think of it as all those things, and even more than we can even really scrape the surface of here. It's just a wonderful beauty, and again, this is the first of Jesus's signs, as they're called in the Gospel of John, pointing out that he is the Messiah, the Son of God. Right. And
I think also as well, Jesus was like, that was his wedding gift. Everybody at the time they brought gifts, and I think that was his saying, hey, this is my contribution as a wedding gift to you. Right.
And so you can see in all this commentary, the church fathers looked at Christ's words and actions in this episode of the wedding of Cana. It's like, why is this included? Besides the miracle, which of course speaks for itself, but all those different things that we've been talking about here too. It's like, the fact that it takes place at a wedding, this imagery of wedding, and it's not the wedding ceremony itself either. It's really the celebration, right? The party afterwards, right? And that's what Jesus is pointing to. And what Mary also understands too in her request of her son is it's time to get the party started, if you will. That's the way I view this beautiful exchange that takes place here. We don't even know who the bride and groom are, which is why it's so easy just to insert every married couple into that scene, and that our Lord and Our Lady are very much there and a part of the celebration as well. Provided, of course, they're invited. Remember, Jesus and Mary and all of them were invited to the wedding. Sadly, they don't get invited to every wedding, I'm afraid, these days. So, all right. So, and then another major passage. We'll stay with this. Another major passage that Jesus talks about in the Synoptic Gospels is his teachings on divorce, right? And so some of the Pharisees approach him. It's in Matthew chapter 19, Mark chapter 10, and I forget which chapter it is in Luke, but they're all there. And the Pharisees are trying to trap Jesus in his speech, right? And so they ask about his teaching. Should a man be allowed to divorce his wife? And of course, Jesus asked them, well, what did Moses say on the subject? And true enough, in the Pentateuch, the old law, a man was allowed to divorce his wife for essentially really any reason. One thing you have to remember with all of this is that Moses and the law that came at Mount Sinai came out about after the fall had happened, God establishing the law as a pedagogue to instruct the people on right relationship with God and with one another. And Jesus, while not denying that was indeed the law of Moses, he said, but that's not how it was in the beginning. He points back to the book of Genesis. He points back to the ideal situation that God had established for marriage with Adam and Eve. And that is why what God has joined together, man should not separate, right? And so Jesus draws a very hard line on marriage, and his disciples kind of question him afterwards, away from the crowd. What you want to go over that again, Jesus? That was very revolutionary at that time because divorce was very prevalent, not only among the Hebrews, the Israelites, but also among other cultures as well. Again, a fallout of the fall, this disparity between husband and wife, and often the weaker legal position of women at that time too, all reflected in all this. So what Jesus is saying is rather revolutionary, and he said very clearly to his disciples, anyone who divorces and remarries, this is adultery. This is not allowed. And in fact, his disciples say, well, if that's the case, it's better not to get married at all. And Jesus didn't say no. He's like, well, if you can handle not being married and living the life of celibacy, go for it. But if you're going to marry, then you've got to understand this indissolubility part that is very much pointed to in all of those synoptic passages. And this is something the church teaches and upholds and is very much criticized for in this day. I have definitely heard it say, how can you Catholics be so cruel as to not permit the divorce? And the really simple answer for us is, we don't think we have the ability to overrule our founder. Jesus is pretty clear on his teachings. The church has held to that for a very long time. And as a result, the church holds to this teaching to uphold this nuptial covenant between Christ and his church. The marriages that are covenanted between people today, in the future, and in the past are a reflection of this nuptial covenant between God and his people. Yes, ma'am?
So what happens if people divorce?
Right.
That's in the church.
So we'll talk.
You're anticipating the next question.
Yeah, well, so what happens then is that, because it does happen, of course, and so those persons, presuming, of course, that the marriage that was originally contracted was a valid and licit one, and it didn't even have to be licit, just valid. So presuming it's valid, then persons that divorce civilly would not be permitted to remarry, either civilly or in the church.
But they can still take the Eucharist.
Yeah, presuming that they are living civilly, not cohabitating, not entering into a second marriage, absolutely.
So what makes a marriage valid versus invalid?
We'll talk a little bit about that. There's a whole host of reasons why a marriage might be valid or invalid. And I'll preface all of this with, I am not a canon lawyer, but we'll talk about some of the major stuff that often happens. Yes, ma'am?
Fred and I weren't married in the church, and we've been married 25 years. So does that mean for 25 years we've been committing adultery?
That's not necessarily, because the adultery would be as if you married someone who was already validly married beforehand, right? So if Fred had some other marriage before you got married that you didn't know about, but he did, you would be okay because you didn't know about, but he would not be in that case. But anyway, let's continue moving on here, but we'll get into a little bit of
Talk more about that.
validity of marriages here in a second. So, and again, St. Paul in his letter to the Ephesians talks about how husbands should love their wives, wives loving their husbands, all sorts of language there. He speaks of a greater mystery, the mystery of the love between Christ and his church. And again, that's another further safeguard of this high, lofty, sacramental status that marriage has in the church. And that's something that Paul wishes to say. He also says in another place that, if you're unmarried, stay unmarried. That's a good way to go, But if you must marry, then this is how you ought to live that way, right? And so that's as we say, the living the consecrated life, the sacerdotal life is all pathway to holiness as well. And again, both states are needed to each other to nourish and support one another, actually. Okay, so then let's go on to the next slide here. The celebration of marriage, right? So this would ordinarily take place during a Holy Mass. And I love this image here because unless you're Catholic, you typically don't tend to think of marriage as having anything to do with church or I guess you could say the sacrifice of the Eucharist, but it makes perfect sense in our Catholic sacramental teaching because, again, this love between husband and wife is a direct reflection of Christ's love for his church. And as Christ slept the sleep of death on the cross and was pierced in his side, blood and water coming forth from his side, his spouse, the church, was born in that moment. And which mimics Eve being created out of the side of Adam when he was sleeping in the Garden of Eden, and God created a spouse for him in that sense. And so everything that's happening with the cross, with what's happening with the sacrifice of the Mass, it's only fitting that this would be part of the sacramental celebration of a marriage. So it's just a beautiful, beautiful image. The same sort of self-sacrifice that Christ had for his church, man and woman are called to have the same level of self-sacrifice for one another. So, and again, one of the also differences between the celebration of marriage versus some of the other sacraments is we talk about who can validly perform these sacraments. So, for example, we saw in a case of holy orders, the only person who can validly ordain a person to the diaconate, the priesthood, or even another bishop would be a bishop, right? So even Father Alex cannot validly confect the sacraments of holy orders, right? When it comes to a marriage, however, the actual ministers of the sacrament, as it were, at least in the Western tradition, the way it's always been understood, is it's the husband and wife themselves. They are the ministers of the sacrament, and they administer the sacrament to one another. The priest, or the deacon, or the bishop, would be church's primary witness to this exchange of consent, which we'll get to here in a second as well as the other witnesses, typically the best man and the maid of honor are usually the two other witnesses that are all sign their name on the contract that takes place as well. But the actual ministers of the sacrament, the ones who confect the sacrament, are the husband and wife, and the matter and form of the sacrament are in the words of the consent, which we'll get to here in a second, as well as in the consummation of the marriage as well. All right.
So wait, in the Eastern or Orthodox Church, is that different?
It is. They see it as primarily, we often say in common parlance that Father so-and-so married us, or we were married by deacon this or that. And that's not wrong to say, because again, they are the church's primary witnesses. But the Eastern tradition has seen, while the consent is certainly the same, but the actual blessing, the nuptial blessing that the priest confers on the couple, that part is the sacrament per se, if you will. And while there is a blessing in the Western Latin rite as well, that is not necessarily seen in the same view. So it's a little bit of a tomato-tomato sort of situation, really. It's a good question. The Eastern tradition sees the minister as the priest. I'm not sure if an Eastern deacon is allowed to do a marriage because of that. I don't know the answer to that. But in the West, which is what we celebrate here, our Latin rite, I just think, again, it's a beautiful image of the husband and wife choosing to enter into this sacrament, and to do so with full knowledge and full consent to the will is a beautiful and holy thing. Let's face it. So, all right.
Can
Yes.
I go back to the lady's question?
Yes.
I mean, my parents were married for 60 plus years, and they were Protestant. I believe they're in heaven. I believe their marriage was sacramental. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. We had a beautiful family. So there's no issue or, so what if you weren't married in the Catholic Church? It's still a sacrament.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not.
And we'll get to that here in a second. A lot of people are sacramentally married in the eyes of the Catholic Church without knowing it. Much like many people are baptized in the Catholic Church validly without really knowing it, right? It's a similar sort of situation there. We'll talk about some of those basic ground rules, if you will, okay? So let's go on to the next part here. So we talked a little bit about matrimonial consent, and again, those of you who are fans of The Princess Bride, remember they had kind of a speedy ceremony because wanted it quickly, but Princess Buttercup never actually says, I do, right? And in fact, she's even asked, did you say I do? No. Well, then you aren't really married, are you? Right? So very, very important part of that. And so it's very important that there be actual consent. You must be free to contract marriage. What does that mean is you're not under any sort of constraint. There isn't somebody with a shotgun to your back saying, say I do, right? Is that really a free choice, a free consent to the will at that point? I think most of us would say, no, it's not, right? So it must be free consent to the will, and there also can't be impeded by any sort of natural or ecclesiastical law. So if you were ordained a priest, you can't really then go into a marriage contract at that point, right? That would be an automatic something that would make something invalid. Or if you were a close blood relative, for example, and there's all sorts of rules there which we won't go into right now. This free to contract marriage is very important because many people perhaps enter into what looks like a valid and illicit marriage, but at the time of marriage, it turns out later it's found out that one or both of the parties were not really free to contract, right? There was some sort of impediment there that existed at the time that the vows were made, thus making the vows that were made null and void. And that leads to a declaration, can lead to a declaration by the church that this particular marriage never actually happened in real life, or in real sacramental life, if you will. And therefore, that would be where a marriage annulment would come from. It would be a declaration that a marriage truly didn't happen because there was a lack of truly free consent of the will of both partners at the time of the wedding. You can't go back a year later and say, oh, I changed my mind. It's all about what is the state of the persons. Again, the husband and the wife are the ones who are administering the sacrament here. They have to have the proper consent, or the marriage might not be valid. Okay, even though it looks and it seems valid to everyone else who maybe even attended the wedding. Yes.
Could you give an example?
I'm sorry.
An example.
An example would be, for example, maybe a person was afraid. Let's say a person had decided to get married to this person. They felt compelled to do so because they had perhaps had a relationship beforehand, and that led the person to feel like, well, we have to get married because now there's a pregnancy involved, and we got to provide a family for this child. Even though one or both of the persons didn't really want to get married and didn't want to really fully enter into the matrimonial understanding the way we talked about in its perfection that God intended. So people felt compelled to get married because they thought, well, it's what's going to be best for the child there, but they didn't really fully commit to it, and it comes out later that that was the case. That is an example of where a marriage might not have actually really truly taken place.
What about age?
Age? Yeah, there are laws with the church below a certain age. Like if you're 7, you can't validly go into a marriage. But I don't know the exact canon law on it. But there are rules with that too. Certain rules can be dispensed with as well too, which we'll talk about here in a second. Matrimonial consent. These vows should be made publicly. There was a time in the history of the church when there had to be more what would be kind of called a clandestine marriage, when either marriage was forbidden or restricted, or for whatever reason there could have been some sort of harm of life or limb. The church did used to allow some clandestine marriages where it wasn't publicly celebrated because, again, for some good reason. But generally, those conditions don't really exist anymore. You have to say I do publicly in front of at least 2 witnesses and a witness of the church for it to be a sacramental marriage. And then the law of the church also says that the persons who are preparing for marriage should be prepared by their parents, by their pastor. And so one of the jobs that Father Alex has is in counseling and meeting with engaged couples who are preparing for marriage. And depending on the couple, you might meet, well, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 plus more times than that as needed to get to these couples to understand all these different things of what they're really entering into. Because one of the things you would like to avoid, I would imagine, as a pastor, is a situation where someone isn't really freely consenting to the will. There's some sort of impediment that this person is hanging on to for whatever good or bad reason, and you want to avoid having that situation of nullity come into play. Is that sum it up pretty well? Okay, yes. So that's part of what, but also to make sure that this, a priest is also trained in relationships and can provide guidance to a couple that might be struggling to really enter into the fullness of the sacrament as well. So, and then we get into here to what are called mixed marriages and disparity of cult. So this would be where if a person who is Catholic marries a baptized non-Catholic, right? Now that can be a perfectly valid and sacramental marriage. However, at least on the Catholic's part, you would have to get the permission of your bishop to sign off on that. So generally that's a form that's completed and filled out. Generally that's going to be allowed simply because a think most bishops would agree that if they didn't agree to allow this marriage to go forth, this couple's just gonna go off and get married civilly outside of the church anyway. So we might as well bring them into the fold, but there's always an agreement that needs to be made beforehand. That if the bishop will allow it, but the Catholic must be free to practice his or her faith unhindered by the other spouse, and there's an understanding that the children are to be baptized and raised Catholic as well. Disparity of cult would be the same thing, but now we're talking about a non-Christian. So this would be if a Catholic were to marry a Jewish person, a Muslim, a Hindu, and so on. And so again, you would need to get permission from the bishop. And again, there needs to be express agreements by the non-Christian spouse that the Christian is going to be free to practice his or her faith. The children are to be raised in the church. Any questions about that? That comes up, and that's an example of where ordinarily that's not recommended. However, the church law does allow for a dispensation to be made in those cases.
So my kids, so say if I'm Jewish and my wife is Catholic, they can't be cashews?
They can't be cashews. Yes, you can call them that, I suppose, but no.
I'm just wondering.
Yes, I've heard that. Or it's the church frowns upon these things because it gets difficult for the children, right?
Yeah.
Right? They see one parent practicing this one faith, this other person practicing another faith, or maybe practicing no faith at all, and in the religious upbringing of this child, there's confusion, right? I've seen it a ton of times as a principal of a Catholic school where we have maybe one family member who is a practicing Catholic, but the other is not, or perhaps is very much anti the church. Very difficult for the child, very difficult for the other spouse in that situation. It goes a whole lot smoother, not 100% of the time, goes a whole lot smoother when the husband and wife are on the same page when it comes to the faith, because then the faith will be that much better of a chance to be transmitted to the next generation, which, as we saw on an earlier slide, is one of the whole points of marriage in the first place, is to bring about the good of the spouses for one another and the good of the offspring that comes about of the union as well. So that's the reason why the church would say it's not ideal. That being said, there are exceptions to that, and there can be very good situations, which is why the church allows for the dispensations in the first place. Yes?
Doesn't Paul tell us not to marry a non-believer?
Correct. And in fact, that can be a grounds for a declaration of nullity of a marriage because of a disparity of cult. And if, let's say, the other person didn't fulfill their agreement when the marriage was contracted, that they were going to allow the other person to live out their Christian faith or to raise the children properly, the other person goes back on that. That could be a reason for a declaration of nullity right there, because Paul does say that, and that is very much in Scripture. There's another exception somewhere too.
So you said it's more of a suggestion than a command?
More of a suggestion than a command. In that case, again, the church can allow a dispensation. You do have to get express permission from the bishop to go over this idea that you really shouldn't get into a mixed marriage or disparity of cult if you can avoid it. The church understands that isn't always the case. Dispensations can be made, but then the people entering into it need to understand what the ground rules are. And sometimes people don't. They'll agree to them, but they don't live it out, right? And so that ends up wreaking havoc later on. Like I said, there are counterexamples of where persons really are faithful to that, and can lead to beautiful marriages and beautiful children raised in the faith, but sometimes not.
So the command of Paul is do not be unequally yoked, which we typically interpret as marry another person who shares your values, your faith, and the church interpreting it that way says you ought to marry another Catholic. In Oklahoma, we're about 4%, well now we're maybe 6% Catholic, so you've got 6% of the population when you're looking around to pick from. And so just the odds of finding a good holy Catholic spouse
It's a numbers game in some cases, yeah.
And maybe even some of the people in this room, if you can't find one, you make one, right? You make a good Catholic spouse.
I know, I definitely have known some people who've kind of gone in with the intention of, perhaps I can convert my spouse one day.
So you want to share those same values, that's the commandment, shared, but if you have enough shared values with your spouse, the church can dispense, as he's talking about prosperity, cult, and disparity, but we would still say, don't be unequally yoked, as in, don't marry someone who you don't have enough in common, you don't share enough values with, that it's not gonna be a successful marriage.
Well, I think he phrases it like, do not become yoked with a non-believer. Is that?
Mm-hmm.
that
And
word
so,
name?
and that's
So I don't, of course, there was only, one church back then, but I don't necessarily take that to just mean like the one church, like, a believer in Jesus Christ. I guess I don't think that verse would cut out Protestants, but I can see how it'd be a problem for Hindus and Muslims.
Yeah, and I think that's how that particular verse, that particular exception, the Pauline exception, I believe is what it's called.
Yeah.
I think it only applies to the disparity of cult where it is a non-Christian that the Christian is married to, not another denomination.
Yeah, the
But
Pauline
again,
privilege.
I'm not a canon
The
lawyer.
Pauline privilege specifically is if two non-Christians get married, one has a dramatic conversion, follows Christ, then their spouse is hostile, then that marriage can not even be annulled. It's a privilege that that marriage contract is voided because.
But
of
the non-believing
newfound-
spouse has to be the one to leave.
Yeah, or to be abusive.
Right.
The other one's the Petrine privilege, and it's a little even more confusing.
Yeah, again. Call
We got a lot more.
Father Will, he'll let you know.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next part. So marriage FAQs, so the effects of the sacrament of matrimony. Okay, let's say you get married, right? So what are some of the effects that this sacrament gives to the new couple, right? So a bond is created between the spouses, right? That's this idea of a bond in marriage is very much a real perk of the whole idea there. The spouses reflect that bond that exists between God and His church. Again, so just as Jesus loves the church, gave everything to His spouse, the church, that is in effect the grace that the spouses receive as part of the sacrament of matrimony. And again, it's this indissoluble covenant for the reasons that we talked about before. And Christ's grace then helps each spouse get the other to heaven. That is not my marching orders as I see it. My marching orders is to get my wife to heaven. Through my words, through my actions, through my prayers. All, of course, by the grace of God, right? But I shouldn't be saying and doing things that gets in the way, that turns her away from the Lord. If so, guess who's going to be held responsible for it? Yeah. And vice versa. Nancy's got to help me get across the finish line too, with her words, actions, love, prayers, support, all those things. You're there to help each other. What a novel concept, right? And then the goods and requirements of conjugal love. So you have, again, this indissolubility and faithfulness are absolutely demanded. We see this, of course, in the Mosaic Law with the Ten Commandments, but also just common sense and the natural law that's written in our hearts. It points to this idea that marriage ought to be what God had intended for it in the book of Genesis as well. So indissolubility, faithfulness are demanded. No longer two, but one flesh. So again, the marriage, in order for it to be valid, it must be consummated, and that is part of the married life that takes place. Divorce, not really an option. Separation might have to happen in some particular cases. Again, this is all with guidance and help of the church. Often a pastor can help a couple that is not able to reconcile. There's always the hope and the ideal of reconciliation, but sometimes that isn't always the case. And so, in that case, a married couple might have to live separately and chastely and celibately. And then, of course, there needs to be an openness to fertility as well. And so, this is something that is also an essential part of what it means to get married, is that you can't have a block on love. You can't say, I'm going to have this sort of relationship with my spouse, but I'm going to withhold this aspect, or we're not going to be open to the fruitfulness and faithfulness that God has. That, again, is in contradiction to what God's command was to Adam and Eve. Be fertile and multiply. It's got to be about bonding between the couple, and it's about babies, right? Now, you might say, well, wait a minute, well, what if a couple is infertile or not able to have children and such? Well, that is not really the fault of the husband and wife, and in fact, that can lead to a very faithful and wonderful spousal relationship. But if it be God's will that a couple is able to have children and bring them into the world, then that is part of your wedding vows. In fact, that are made publicly in front of the church and everybody who came to the wedding as well too. So bonding and babies.
Now, when you talk
Got to be open to it. Yes.
What about adoption? Where does that fit on in there?
Right, so a couple could choose to adopt. Well, God adopted every one of us as children of God when we were baptized, right? So we were all brought into God's family via adoption, not by natural generation the way Jesus was. He is, the eternally begotten Son of the Father. But all of us through baptism become sons and daughters of God by adoption. So in the same way, we can reflect God's great love for his people and his love by choosing to adopt a child and raising the child as if it were your own natural offspring. And just as you are a son or daughter of God via your baptism, and a co-heir of the kingdom, it's really no different with your adopted children as well. Great question. Okay, and then the last part here, so that leads then to the domestic church, right? And so this is the main end game and the hopeful result of the proper discernment process between a husband and wife who choose to enter into a marriage covenant. They then live out their life, further strengthening the bond that's created between them in the sacrament, and if God so wills it, to raise children that are given to them. And so that's exactly what happened with Mary and Joseph, right? So we have this beautiful image of the domestic church. And again, Christ, his first act, even before he even says a word, he redeems the family. He redeems the idea of this domestic church. And this is the whole groundswell of what is needed more than anything else in the church today. We've got a lot of wonderful popes and bishops and such that teach a lot of wonderful, great things, but if there isn't a domestic church living it out, it'll fall on deaf ears and never really come to fruition. So again, the married life leads to further vocations in the sacerdotal and religious life, and then those persons can help the parents in the domestic church lead their life as leaders in the domestic church. And this is where you as a parent also can exercise the priesthood of the baptized very well, because I, as a father, am able to bless my children, right? This is something that we see in the Old Testament and still very much the case in the domestic church. And it's just the beautiful exercise of the priesthood that was conferred upon you as part of your baptism, and that as part of the domestic church that you're creating in your home. You are the first and foremost teachers of your children in all things, especially about the faith. And so that is just a wonderful gift that God does give to his people through the sacrament of matrimony. Right? So again, the home is the first school of Christian life. And again, we have a good school over there, but we don't have cooperation from the domestic church in the same way. That we've got good holy priests and bishops and so on. But if the domestic church doesn't put these things into practice, doesn't really come to fruition. So we really need the domestic church just as much as we need all the other parts of the church as well. We have this vocation crisis in the church we often talk about, and there certainly is, certainly in the sacerdotal state and the religious state, but also in the marriage state as well. That, you know, overall in the church, marriages are on the decline for a variety of reasons. That's no bueno for the church. We need all of these different states of holiness to be on the increase. Join us. So, okay. Any questions, any thoughts about this sacrament of marriage? Big overview, of course. I'm sure lots of individual questions and such. I'll leave that to Father. But let me just say though, as a final thing, go ahead. Yes.
What are people that are getting married just in the courthouse? Like, how does that?
Right. So we would say any marriage between any two baptized persons, it can be valid, and so on. And even if it's performed civilly. Now, it's illicit because, especially if one of those persons is Catholic, they ought to know that they're supposed to get married in the church, right? And to have the blessing of the church on that. You can then later, after the couple comes to their senses and decides, hey, we need to have the church in our lives, and we want to have our marriage blessed by the church or consecrated by the church, as it's called sometimes, that can easily be done, right? So this would be recognized as a valid wedding, a valid marriage, and same thing between two baptized Protestants as well. So that would be a valid Catholic sacramental wedding, even though they didn't know it or realize it, right? Question?
Can I talk just a little bit more about just validity and all of that? So, Mr. Lavi mentioned clandestine marriages. Marriage is one of the things, the sacraments of the church, that has actually changed over time, how it's celebrated. Used to be, there could be clandestine marriage. You and a girl that you really liked, you go out behind the barn and you promise to love her, she promises to love you. You get her done right there, you're married. That created a ton of problems, as you can imagine. So the church added as an impediment for Catholics, for baptized Catholics, that if you were to be validly married, it had to be in front of a witness of the church. Because some of those boys would take a different girl each week out behind the barn, and then you didn't know which one they were married to, right? Something about human nature doesn't change. But, so that's where it's not by natural law that it has to be witnessed by the church, because we know before the church existed, marriage existed. But to keep marriage well regulated and to keep from all of that pain of, okay, this guy's a Lothario, he's a bad guy, marriage is more public and it has to be witnessed by the church. So the dispensation to be married not by a priest is very rarely given, but it can be given. Say you're marrying a swell gal and her dad's a Protestant minister, and it's always been his dream to marry his daughter in their church. That is a possibility. That could be one of the exceptions of why you might get married outside of the church. But in general, for Catholics, every baptized Catholic, the requirement is you would get married in the church. Other grounds, so back to the questions of annulments, just really quickly, just an overview. We heard in the scriptures this weekend, Jesus actually, is the reading from Sunday, he who divorces and remarries, unless the marriage is unlawful, that's a very big unless the marriage is unlawful, commits adultery. So what the annulment process does is it goes back and looks at, was this marriage lawfully contracted? And so there are instances where the marriage was unlawful, it wasn't validly contracted. Some of those examples of those are lack of due discretion. I didn't know what marriage meant. I didn't know, all my friends were getting married. I figured it was the right thing to do, so I found, this schmuck and didn't really think about it, and voila, we were married, right? Lack of discretion is one. Not promising fidelity is a big one. So fidelity is one of the essential parts of marriage. I choose you and only you forever. So if in the back of your mind you're like, well, if this doesn't work out, there's Tina or there's Debbie or there's, not a promise of fidelity. Right? The next, consanguinity is one of the ones that Mr. Laffey mentioned. You can marry your third cousin without any dispensations. You can marry your second cousin. I think it takes a dispensation from the bishop. You can't marry your first cousin, although I do think popes in the past have dispensed even marrying your first cousin. Don't recommend it. You end up like the Habsburgs. You get, you know, bleeding diseases and whatnot. So,
Distended jaw.
yeah, all kinds of weird stuff. So, why the church has so many rules and laws around marriage is because it's one of the messiest, but one of the most beautiful parts of human life, right? So we know that it can be the greatest thing when it's going well, when it's great. Another one, if you never intend to give your spouse the right to have children, right? You enter into marriage and you think, I don't ever want kids. This isn't for me. Even if like in the moment you're like, well, I don't want kids right away, that's okay. But if you're like, nope, never ever under any circumstance, that could be grounds for an annulment as well. So all of those are grounds for what might make a marriage unlawful, right? And the annulment process would be to look through those grounds and see if they were present, and then that marriage would be declared null, you'd be free to marry again. Now, if your marriage isn't sacrament for any one of these reasons, does that mean, oh, no, we're cooked? No, it means God provides actual graces in the moment as well, actual graces to love your spouse, but you want to get rid of any of those impediments. You want to make sure your marriage is blessed in the church so that you know the grace of the sacrament is flowing between the two of you, and that the Lord is aiding you just like he did at the wedding in Cana with his grace and abundance.
Yeah, what about a situation where two Catholics marry and over time one of the spouses become abused?
Mm-hmm. So abuse in and of itself is not one of those grounds. It's not listed in those grounds. Abuse is evil and terrible. If at the day of that when the marriage was contracted, if the spouse didn't intend to treat the other spouse as his true spouse, his or her true spouse, and including the love there and the taking care of the spouse, then that would be the grounds for the annulment. But if at some point your spouse becomes a terrible spouse, that in and of itself isn't a grounds for annulment. It's a grounds for you to really embrace the cross of Jesus Christ and pray, sacrifice. This is where the church would counsel that separation. Get out of the dangerous situation. Get out of there. But pray for, sacrifice for, love your spouse even from a distance.
What if the spouse is abusing the children?
Get the kids out of there ASAP. Yes. That's what a priest will counsel you to do every time.
Well, I know I listened to a podcast in December where a priest was, I wish I could remember names and was talking about that the church does not support domestic violence
That's
for
right.
the woman.
Under any circumstances.
I know because I knew a woman at the time, she was talking to me, her children were being abused. And she had asked me, you know, about what could happen if he got turned into a CPS. And I said, well, you would go to jail with him because you're not protecting your kids. And she got with a canon lawyer, a Monsignor. Unfortunately, I don't know what he said, but she wanted reassurance that if her husband was gonna continue down this path, because she wanted her kids to have a father. And she wanted a way out if she had to have one.
Yeah. Right, so, and that's again where it gets messy. Every situation is different. My own parents are divorced, right? And my mom got married not knowing, remarried not knowing the rules of the church. We've done a bad job passing on and teaching what the church teaches about marriage. The priest had to take her aside at some point and say, oh hey, by the way, you know what Jesus said in the gospel is true, and don't worry, I'll help you seek to annul your first marriage and bless your second marriage in the church, and that's what happened. But it was a pain and suffering for her because she didn't know the church's teaching. Ultimately, though, God used even that situation to bring about good for both my parents, I would say, to give me some gifts, but also some burdens to bear in my life, but ultimately used it for the good. It's not why I am a priest, but I do think it's why I can be personable and understanding and loving as a priest to couples who have experienced difficulty and discord and even divorce in their life. So God is not done with any couple. There's always hope, and there's always God's grace. So, but but it does sometimes get messy, and the Lord likes to work in the mess. That's one of the places He does His best work. So.
He goes for the lost sheep.
Yeah. Right. So the other thing that was talked about briefly was that fertility. So one of the weird things about Catholics is we believe that artificial methods of contraception, artificial birth control, are a sin. That, like Mr. Laffey was saying, that when you say yes to your spouse, you say yes to being a mother, you say yes to being a father, you say yes to openness to God's plan. And this is one of the harder teachings for us to defend, because at first all of our Protestant brothers and sisters were on board with us. They're like, yes, contraception is evil, but as it's proliferated through the culture and become more and more normal, many Protestant churches are like, oh, we just won't talk about it, or we'll look the other way. It's one of the harder teachings of the church to live out. Even the statistics of Catholics who actually strive to live it, it's not a very high percentage of Catholics who really strive to live this well, but it is one of those ways. So natural family planning, having recourse to the rhythms and the cycles that God has put in our natural bodies, but ultimately still trusting His plan in that, is what Catholics teach in marriage prep, what Catholics promote. And there are just reasons to delay having kids. Kids, as Mr. Laffey said, are one of the purposes for marriage. There's no just reason to say, well, I'm never having kids. Leaving it to God's plan is using natural family planning rather than artificial contraception. And if you're interested in learning more about that, we can talk more one-on-one. I would love to. There are different methods of natural family planning. The Marquette method is my favorite. And again, it's weird for a priest to teach couples about the cycles and intimacy between spouses. But it was weird to learn it in seminary too. So if I do get the weird, I'm going to give the weird right back to
It
you.
works both ways though, Father, because it can also help a couple that is having trouble conceiving
Yeah.
to learn how to better take advantage of the as you say, the natural cycles that do exist and bring about a conception that way. So it works both ways.
Yeah, I'm happy to share more about that, but that's one of the weird things that Catholics teach about marriage that maybe you didn't know.
But again, it gets back to this idea, again, it's about what is the purpose of marriage? Why did God institute it? It gets back to the unity of the spouses and the children that come about from them. And so if, as Father says, you're not really open to fertility and you're closing that part out, then you are no longer have that full fidelity, that full faithfulness that is called for as a part of the marriage covenant. And so that it's just as much as if you weren't intending to be faithful to your bride, not to have that unity with that one spouse, but that paramour or that mistress or other guy, just as much is breaking the idea of what this faithfulness and fidelity is all about, just in a different way. So, the other thing I would also add too is we talked a lot about annulments or a nullity of a marriage. This is not. Sometimes critics of the church will say, "Well, this is just a Catholic divorce. You're just calling it something else." No, it's very important to understand that it gets back to this idea of consent being one of those critical matters in the matter and form of a sacrament. And if something is lacking in the matter and form of a sacrament, the sacrament is invalid. And so that's what the church investigates when there is a case of nullity that comes before the tribunal, is they're looking to see what was the conditions at the time that the vows were exchanged. It's not about something that happens later on, 10, 15 years later. If everything was perfectly fine at the time of marriage, even though things might sour later, the marriage is still valid. And so the church doesn't have the power to dissolve a valid marriage, because again, we don't claim to have more authority than our founder. It's a hard teaching, and that's exactly what Jesus' disciples said at the time. But with God's grace, we can live out the teachings of the church and come to see its beauty and learn through the power of the sacrament of what love really means in God's eternal plan. and it's expressed as a bond of fidelity between God and His people in a marriage covenant. That's the way it was in the Old Testament. It's no different in the New Testament. It's a beautiful thing, and just as God is always faithful to His people and is always seeking to bring about His spouse back into the flock, the lost sheep, if you will. No one. God isn't finished with any couple, and sometimes the longer path leads to a greater holiness down the road. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the rite of election that is coming up here this weekend, right? So we are to meet at the shrine of Blessed Stanley Rother on the south side of Oklahoma City at what time?
So there's two different times.
Yes, oh yes, thank you.
If you are a catechumen, raise your hand if you know you're a catechumen. Nobody knows. So if you are going to be baptized or conditionally baptized, you're a catechumen. So you're going to be baptized or conditionally baptized. Then we're going to meet there at 3 p.m. And your spouse and family.
Say those names, Father.
Go ahead.
Okay, so that would be Trenton, Jaden, Jonathan, Dee, Stephanie, Paxton, Fred, and Candace. Meet at 3 p.m. with your sponsor.
So that's 3 p.m. with your sponsor, and if you want, with your spouse or loved one, even if they're going to the next one. At 4 p.m., all of the candidates, so the candidates is someone who's already been baptized, so being received in the full communion with their church, they will meet at 4 p.m. If the 3 o'clock one goes long, we'll be standing at the back for a little bit, but I don't think it will. There should be enough time for us to exchange. But again, if one of you are one or one of the other, you can go to both. But that one will be at 4 p.m. Because normally we do all of this in one ceremony because there's so many people. The church seats 2,000 people. So there's like more than 900 people coming into the church this year in just the western half of Oklahoma. And so they had to split it into two. So 3 p.m. for the catechumens, I am going to be baptized or conditionally baptized. 4 p.m. for the candidates. I've been validly baptized. I'm just going to be received into the church or receive confirmation.
I'd say the main point of this rite of election too is to kind of connect you as part of this greater movement. Again, we have a nice little thing going on here in Ponca City at St. Mary's, but as it turns out, we're part of something much, much bigger. The whole world is divided up into these dioceses, and they are each headed by a bishop, and so this is an opportunity for you to have a connection with the head of our local church here in western Oklahoma, and that is Archbishop Coakley. And so that is where this where you can see where your call to be part of the church in a new way is connected with a greater call that God has to so many others who are in similar situations as many of you from all different walks of life and points of contact. And so it's a beautiful thing to see that you're part of something so much greater. So I'm hoping that it's a really exciting thing. I had never been to one myself. It's a cradle Catholic. We didn't do anything. So, and then you go to this, it's like, wow, this is just a big deal, you know. And there's just a lot of people here, and from all different points around the diocese. It's just like, wow, God is just doing wonderful things. You just come away just like, wow, things are happening in our church. That's exciting. Yes, sir.
I was gonna ask you, is it possible, can we bring our Bible to have the bishop sign it for us?
I don't.
As like we're coming in, this is like 2026 is a big thing for us. I mean, it's like a once a lifetime.
Because of the large number, I think that probably you should corner him at another time. Maybe when he comes here for confirmation, or when you engage him at a different event. Liturgically, what's going to happen?
Come here for confirmation.
Yes.
He's going to come here for the children's confirmation after Easter. Yes. So liturgically, what the rite expects to happen is every person's name is called, they walk forward, they shake the bishop's hand, they meet him one-on-one, they maybe get 1 or 2 seconds of FaceTime, and they go back to their place. due to, like, if we did that 980 some times,
Yeah.
we'd be there
For a
weeks.
very long time.
Right? And so because of the large number, what actually will happen is all of you will be invited to stand. The bishop will greet and address you with some words of welcome and pray over you, give you a blessing, and then all will be seated. Again, the ideal is all of you get some one-on-one time, but like when these rites were developed, there weren't that many, the whole world was Catholic, so to bring someone into the church was kind of a rare thing. Now, things look a little different when a lot of people are coming back to the church or want to join the church, and so the rites have been adapted to be able to do a whole bunch at once, which is in one way sad, but another way exciting that everybody. But the bishop comes a few times a year to Ponca City. He comes for a school mass at least once a semester. He comes for confirmation. If he comes outside that time, it means I'm in trouble, so say a prayer. But there will be an opportunity to get some one-on-one time, to get him to sign something or have some FaceTime with him in the future.
We usually announce when the Archbishop is going to come. It ends up in the bulletin or an announcement at Mass. So if that's something that's important to you, I've had students or families like, we'd like to have our rosary blessed by the Archbishop. Of course, at those times, when it's a much smaller gathering and you can have a private moment with the bishop, that'd be the best time. This, again, there's just so many people, it's just not possible.
And
for this
after
particular event,
this particular ceremony, he's signing the books of the elect. So all of us bring our book with the names of those who are going to enter the church this year in a nice large book symbolizing, the book of the elect in heaven. And the bishop signs his name at the bottom of each parish's page of the book of the elect. So he's going to be busy signing stuff, just not your Bible that day. So.
I think it was last week you compared the hierarchy to like ranks of the military, and that is just a question just popped in my head. How do you address a bishop? Is it still father?
So there is a different style of address for every, just like there is in the military, there's a different style of address for every rank of clergy. You refer to the Pope as Your Holiness. You refer to a cardinal as Your Eminence, or His Eminence. A bishop is technically Your Excellency. A priest is Reverend Father. There's a style of written address and a style of spoken address. The most common here in the United States, in England, you refer to a bishop as Your Grace. The most common here in the United States is to say Archbishop. Archbishop doesn't really like the title Your Excellency. It is his by right of his being a bishop. He has to strive to live up to it, just like I have to strive to live up to Father. So he prefers Archbishop.
I think it also depends country to country. So in some countries, as you say in England, it sounds a little bit more formal already right there, Your Grace. And there it would seem too familiar to just say Archbishop or just Bishop there because of the different culture there. And so different cultures will do different things too. It's also very common in some cultures, the bishop comes in here to kneel and to kiss his ring, and you'll still see that in some cultures. You don't really see that too much in America.
Right. And again, none of this is afforded to the man, Paul Coakley, because he's, I can tell you, an ordinary sinner just like me. But because of how God has used him as a successor of the apostles to continue the church, that sort of reverence is shown to his office, not to his person.
Good point. Yeah, so I always just say Archbishop. Good morning, Archbishop. How are you, Archbishop?
When you get real familiar with him, you can call him ABC.
That's personal, probably, isn't it though?
He's a great person.
I have a fairly unique situation in that my wife's uncle is a bishop and he frequently visits. In fact, he was here this weekend. They all just call him Uncle Tony. I, though, cannot ever say that. So it's Bishop Taylor. I frequently Bishop Taylor every time. However, my son calls him.
So we're at time, but let's talk just a little bit about Lent.
Yes.
So Gene Smith about Lent, 40 days modeled after the 40 days of Christ in the desert, 40 days of Moses on Mount Sinai, a period of fasting and preparation. When we're looking at Lent, we're always looking towards Easter, right? So Lent is about preparation. It's not a penance and flagellation for its own sake. That's not a good thing. It's penance, preparation, conversion, turning back to the Lord to welcome the Easter joy, and it's especially powerful for you guys because at this Easter, I'm willing you'll receive all of the sacraments. So there's a lot of spiritual warfare that will happen as Easter gets closer and closer. It'll come into your head to say, hey, I really regret doing all this stuff. Is any of this even true? I want to promise you those are temptations from the evil one trying to throw you off the path of the track. Wrestle with them, bring them to Jesus, keep searching for the truth, but take this season of Lent seriously. There are 3 traditional pillars of the season of Lent: prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Prayer, either adding prayers to what you're already doing, or trying to pray the prayers that you're already doing with more conviction and love, really being attentive to your prayer, taking it seriously. We're doing the Hallow Lent Challenge thing, so if you want to be a part of that, we'll all pray together those prayers on Hallow. That's not by any means obligatory or even normal at a church, but it's just something we're trying this year. The next fasting, so there are 2 days of fasting in the church's calendar: Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. Fasting means taking 1 meal and 2 small snacks that don't equal a second meal. So used to be they would fast for all 40 days of Lent. You would take 1 meal or 2 small snacks. It was great weight loss, but that's not why we do it. We're pretty soft in our era. There are 2 days of fasting, and they are Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. The Fridays in Lent are days of abstinence, where we abstain from meat. Why do we abstain from meat? The Pope owns Long John Silver's. Just kidding. Bread lobster? No. We abstain from meat as a sacrifice that can be universally known. Oh, those crazy Catholics, they don't eat meat on Friday, so it's a witness to the world. But also it's just a personal, something we can offer with love, because that is the day on which Christ died for us. And so if you're not offering it with love, it's like, this darn thing, we're kind of missing the point of it. We're still obliged to it, but we offer it with love. If you inadvertently eat meat on a Friday, say you got your breakfast, you're chowing down on some bacon, you realize it's Friday, oh no, that's not a sin.
It's happened to all of us.
Right, and it happens, it's not a sin. If, though, you decide, to hell with this, forget God, I don't care, I'm gonna have a steak tonight, stick your middle finger to the Lord, that's a grave sin. I think that's a grave sin that you want to
Okay, what about somewhere in between? Where you get a few bites of bacon, and then you're like, oh, it's Friday, and I've still got this much bacon left.
It's a sin to throw away food.
Are there any, I'm diabetic.
Yes.
Are
There are dispensations
Glad
and
you brought that
exceptions
up.
for 2 reasons. 1, age. If you're lower than 14, the laws of fasting and abstinence don't apply. I believe it's 65 on the upper age. So if you're older than 65, the laws of fasting. Now, you still try and do it with a spirit. You join yourself to that. The other one is medical exemptions. So if your doctor has told you it's important that you
Protein.
take then the protein and you need it for your health and well-being.
My
Then you
wife-
listen to your doctors.
My wife is pregnant, so she could also,
Pregnant
although
women are
she,
also suspect.
wants to fast and abstain to the ability that she is able to,
Right.
but, obviously not
So
going to
am
the
I.
point where it's unhealthy for her.
So we don't want to get legalistic about the rules, it's from the heart, but yes, those are exceptions. And then almsgiving. So almsgiving is because this project of Lent, like I'm going to give something up, I'm going to grow, I'm going to really grow in holiness, can become too internal focused, looking at myself, how I need to grow, my own sins, my own faults. That's never healthy. So almsgiving is that pillar that's supposed to look out, see the needs of those around us. And almsgiving is charitable aid to the poor, giving of yourself, your time, your talent, your treasure in a special way during Lent. A lot of times I will try and tie my fasting and almsgiving together. So say I give up fancy drinks at the coffee shop at the Perk, and all of a sudden I've got $5 extra each week because I don't know how much a drink at the Perk is these days, but it's getting more every day. At the end of Lent, I can give each one of those $5 that I saved that week to some cause that I really believe in. Or I save time not scrolling on my phone. I can give that to prayer. I can give that to trying to serve my family or help others. So they can all go together and coalesce. It's a custom that, in addition to the fasting that is obliged to the church, that we all do, that we pick something personal to ourselves. This is not mandated by the church, but it's the universal custom. So you pick something that's meaningful to you to give up throughout Lent as a little sacrifice, a little offering of love to Jesus, that every time you desire that thing, like, man, I really wish I had a cigarette right now, you think, okay, Jesus, I'm gonna forego this for love of you, and offer it up to you. Now, if it's a habit if it's a sin or a habit that you want to get rid of, I would say fast all the days of Lent. If it's something that you're just willfully giving up, every Sunday is technically a solemnity. So you gave up sweets, but you want to celebrate the solemnity. Taking a modest sweet thing on a Sunday helps you celebrate the Sunday, and remember that that is the day of the resurrection. But if it's something you want to give up or not continue after Lent, a bad habit or a sin, don't do it on Sunday, because then it just, counteracts the whole point of the thing anyway.
Something we encourage even with the school children, because even though they're young, you can still learn some of the values of sacrifice. And again, we live in a culture that is all about instant gratification, take care of myself first, do whatever I want, whenever I want to, however I want to. And for a child to say, to take a good thing, such as giving up chocolate, which is very, very simple, but this, there's nothing sinful about eating chocolate, but for a child to say, I'm going to forego that for the love of the Lord, just a small thing like that. What a powerful thing to learn some self-control and to putting God first and myself second. And can be very hard for even an adult to learn as well. So that's I unabashedly love Lent. Lent is great. It just gets back to basics, and it's just like what's really important, right? And it's pretty easy to figure out what's not important in your life or what's become too important or getting in the way of God, where instead of God being at the center, God's just somewhere on the periphery instead, and these other things have kind of taken the center stage. So Lent's a time to let's restore the order here. Let's get things back to the way they need to be. But again, it needs to be done out of love for God, not for, some self-aggrandized self-help.
Yeah.
I just want to lose a few pounds or whatever it
That's
is.
just a happy byproduct.
Yeah, right.
Questions about Lenten season?
So the other thing that I would add is if you give up maybe 20 to 30 minutes of your day every day during Lent, say the Rosary, because that focuses on the life of Christ. Or say the 15 prayers of St. Bridget of Sweden, because that focuses on the passion of Christ. Those are very strong prayers, and it takes 20 to 30 minutes to go through those. And as you get more, deeper into those prayers, you're going to spend 30 to 45 minutes. But it's worth it, especially during Lent, to do something like that.
You remind me of another devotion. The Stations of the Cross are offered at the church every Friday at 6 p.m. You'll walk with the Lord through His Passion. I think maybe I mentioned this last week. I don't know. And it's a really beautiful devotion. It's a devotion. It's not required. It's a beautiful thing to come. And then we have a meager meal, a Lenten meal here afterwards, meatless and pretty simple. But
We also do one in the morning for the school. So if coming in the evening doesn't work for you and you'd like to come do Stations of the Cross, you're welcome to come join us there. Stations is something you can do anywhere, anytime.
yeah, you can do it at home.
It's a wonderful devotion.
What is the difference between the morning and the evening Ash Wednesday service?
All the Ash Wednesday services are exactly the same except the 12:10. The 12:10 will just be a liturgy of the word and the distribution of ashes. So the others will include Mass, but a priest is only allowed to say, they're supposed to only say one Mass a day, 2 with permission, and 3 of grave pastoral need. So on Sundays we say 3 because there's just a shortage of priests, and that's what we have to do. So we have 3 Masses on Ash Wednesday, but we can't do 4. So that 4th one is just a service. It'll be the same readings, the same scripture that you'll hear. You'll receive ashes, but it won't follow with the liturgy of the Eucharist and the distribution of Holy Communion. You're welcome to come to
What
any.
time are we? Is it 4th one?
There's 4 of them because we have a mission parish. So
Oh,
8:20
right.
with the school, 12:10 distribution of ash and liturgy of the words, 5 p.m. in Newkirk, and 7 p.m. back here at Ponca.
You're gonna be busy.
Yeah, it's a busy day.
It's one of the busiest days of the year.
It's like Easter's our Super Bowl, but everybody comes for Ash Wednesday. It seems like anytime you give something out for
free. So we got the Ashland, and the other one's Palm Sunday. Everybody wants to come and get their palm on Palm Sunday.
Yep. Ironically, Ash Wednesday is not a holy day of obligation. But at the same time, I know very few Catholics that would purposefully miss it because it's just come and see.
It's a big day.
It's a big day.
Okay, we're over time. Other questions about Lent? Shall we close with a glory be? All glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit,
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Mary, Mother of the Church.
Pray for us.
If you're hung up, Google cool or unique ideas for Lent. You'll get tons of lists. Yes. So you guys, because you were
Just one of them? That one is not.
if you would like to attend,
What is the purpose?
Because the seams are on the outside, and you wear them the same.
Yeah.
Sewn together, it seems
I'm aware of that.
it's up to you.
I saw it.
It's a little easier. Let's face it, I'm not doing it for
You're off the hook, don't worry.
Well,
If you want to go,
we've got, I mentioned, it's like,
And I wondered if we'll have a bigger sign, the catechism one, why don't we get?
well, I would still say do that, but just catch on next time.
Well, I think a lot of people that
We typically don't, we typically don't start with that's not required. We can do all the mysteries, but there's a special meaning to the
it's
song.
also good to
Right, correct. Because it's like the one, in the church day, you normally do the seasonal one on Sunday. So the season of Lent is really about the song. And then Easter, you do the glorious one.
I'm quite the same.
She wanted us to have you up while she was doing it, and so she was working for the whole day. And they do that. That's not. No, same, yeah.
I will get
You're done.
school application.
Okay.
It's been a crazy week.
Nope, I understood.
I do need to sit down and do that. I just haven't found the
I
time.
don't think any of it is super long, but yeah, you do just need to clear out some time for it. So if you run into problems though, just today we had a couple people come in. Can you help us get through this? And yeah,
All right.
try to make the process simpler. So you're welcome. Thank you.
Yep, right, make it easy on yourself.
Oh gosh.
So it would take Holy Communion at our place, which is
So,
timing.
rather convenient.
Should we actually use
Of course, let's face it, I'm not in the line for 30 minutes. So it's not about me at all. So,
just
but last time it was over. We'll find out that.
So you could carry Jesus with you too, kind of dip him in yourself.
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Is that a
So is
real-
that, so everyone gets in the body all the time.
Well, I'll certainly call you to get this going together. Once it's free,
And you can hand it back to you, not put it in.
Like, I would like to either I would put it in my mouth and or I would.
I guess that would give you an incentive to be awake. It's like, well, at least I get these.
So we would, so
Yeah, so I
that
took
would
it.
be, okay, you're not allowed to do it teaching yourself, a lay person cannot take the. Right. The priest would do
The
it.
priest would do it.
So we have a special chalice that Savoria goes together, where there's a little chalice in the midst of the Savoria, so you would distribute that way. A deacon can, they're not.
Oh,
Yes.
Deacon would also have a chance.
Okay.
Party all night?
And I've got
Tonight?
He stayed in the hospital for 2 days.
Okay.
We were able to do all this
Huh?
We got the final, congratulations. No, I got one in the.
No way, I know, I got it Saturday, I was like, okay, and then got the mass, we talked, I was
Well,
like,
it gets back to this idea, it's again,
so, but yeah, I just want to make one of these.
So what we-
I too was you grab all these different maladies, sentence, if you
We go
will.
out, if there's any special there,
Nursed and probably back to life.
between now and Easter.
And even still takes care
Does
of
it
me.
need you up between?
When I got a turkey after these days,
Okay.
so, you know, it's not really any different. I've got fewer of them than I used to, so. But I love that image, is that, and that's, you know, so, you see the Old Testament adoption is treated just the same as the natural
Okay.
offspring,
So
so.
I'm good with
In
him.
God's eyes, that's exactly the same. That's what it's always been treated
We've never
to.
told that.
Mhm.
We don't think we understand.
Right.
That's great, you just like that, fried.
Yeah, it's such a great relationship. He was deceased now. And who likes his, man who is.
I can't do my fries.
Nobody loves them.
The other one.
Yeah. It's just the. Brain surgery, so I can do a quick blessing over that. Do you know what
Maybe before or after the 8:20 minutes, I have confessions now before.
Something like that, you know, after that, go to full
Because he's
Yeah.
living right.
Or 7 PM and I told him I would find.
When he was born,
Yeah, whatever mass you come to,
brain
the same
surgery,
whichever one you come to.
Monday,
Okay,
he's
catch
coming
me
to
at.
us.
Well, again, it's, what's God trying to accomplish through marriage? The unity of the spouses and you're taking care of somebody that lives with yourself. And that's kind of what I was taking, of course, like I said, you can live a holy life, of course, for sure. I was before God, too self-centered, you know, just, so much on myself. And not my way, my love of God. I think God invites so many people to marriage just because that's one of the easiest, most natural ways for a person, at least if a person more reformed correctly, to put the other person first. And to help that other person be virtuous and holy, over and above your own
bringing him
needs
back.
and wants. And of course, for the child, that's, it's the same thing multiplied by the 2,000.
Yeah.
So, so in such a mystical way, that God shares his divine fatherhood with us. His parents. What a remarkable call. One of the other two, that we are, you get to participate in these things, not just as, active participants, it's just, wow. Father's got a busy day.
Yeah, we'll be running all over.
Wait.
Before we go, I wanna come to Mass, I'm going to
Can Fred administer the ashes to you?
No, can you push me
Oh,
over there and then
certainly, oh, yes, certainly.
I'll sit there, I'll be
Yeah,
there for
no,
the
it'll be pretty tight in the church anyway too, so.
Yeah.
See, you're normally sitting more towards the back, would it be better to sit towards the front, you suppose, Fred? Or what do you think?
We could scooch in.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Did you?
Maybe that would be a little better, just so.
Because it's gonna be crowded anyway.
It'll be crowded anyway.
And we usually take a row in between. So.
Right. No, it'll be all right. We'll make it work. Yeah.
You think
Glad you're here. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
And Mark will give you a
Sure. Yeah. No, it'll, yeah. I'll have to put on some.
So much love is more.
But you'll be okay. Hey, thanks so much, guys, for coming. I hope you guys had fun. Yeah, it really turned out pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. It was like, wow, not that I thought it would.
We pulled up until protection on the side of the.
I know, I was like,
wow.
They won't give you another
Really
about
cool.
somebody else.
We tried to, lift it up a little bit, and people came, I think people dressed up nice, and people had that. Yeah. Well, congrats on baby too. Thank you, no worries. June 15th, so I'm excited too. We'll find out, same thing with John, the doctor was like, you gotta call it out.
oh, like
Baby
right
is
like
born.
before?
Yeah,
Did you?
I'm like, what if I get it wrong?
Yeah.
So in the heat of the moment, you just make the wrong call. It's like, and this is, my spouse too. This is like, she's gonna hear it from me.
Yeah,
I don't wanna tell
You
her
don't
the
wanna
wrong
psych
thing.
her out, and then
And
she
what if
gets
I'm
like,
wrong? She'll never forgive me,
you
right?
really did it.
No, I got it right. Yes, I got it right. That was very exciting too. Yeah.
That means at least you got a girl home safe.
That's exactly right. And we love our girl name, and so it's ready to go.
Okay, good, it's on the back.
It's a beautiful name. So maybe we'll get to use it when we got a boy name as well too. So we're good to go.
Yeah.
It would be, you guys realize that, the delay Paul.
Paul Taylor, yes.
Who are both?
I play golf with him every week.
He's pretty good.
He is good.
Yeah.
We play, like once a week when I do our
Sure. Yeah.
Actually, he's really nice.
Oh, yeah.
One of our other guys group made a joke about going to heaven. All the spots I was like.
That sounds
This
Catholic, yes.
I don't.
Not only that, but his brother is a bishop, so there you go.
Yeah.
He introduced me the other night, and I was like, wow, you know what I missed? Have you ever lived?
Well, no.
In the family.
Yes, he's very much, just very supportive of that. His brother comes here and visits often. This was in Boyhood Parish, and he went to school here himself as well. So,
He's an alumni. I was like, oh, great. Oh, I know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Father.
It's lucky that he's just over in Little Rock, Arkansas too. Not all that far. I said 5.5 hours. Yeah, that's really not too bad. He comes here frequently.
Wow. That's really awesome.
I gotta get closer to him so he takes a mass every once in a while.
He will do it.
For us either.
Yeah.
Does he reside over all of Arkansas or is it split?
The entire state. The entire state. There's only one guy that sees there.
And he would be the Archbishop, Arkansas would be the Archbishop, but in the First Vatican Council, the Bishop of Arkansas voted against papal infallibility.
I didn't know this.
Rome has a long memory.
Struck him down.
Wow.
Struck him down.
Arkansas is the
It always struck me as a little odd. But I figured Rome had their reasons. There's your reason. Rome's on that there.
Wow.
Bishop Taylor was not the bishop during the First Vatican Council, which was in the 1870s.
Right.
But
Well,
still.
my dad watched the movie Conclave. Just
yeah.
Crazy.
a couple days ago.
Yeah, it's like,
It was.
we watch it just for the fun of it.
I
Okay.
think if you go in with that sort of
Yes,
spirit,
with like this is gonna be a Hollywood,
story.
I
like a
should-
Hollywood production.
I should have several. I have my
Yeah.
salt shaker ready to go.
Right.
Grains of salt here.
That's what we
and,
did.
yes.
We were like,
He was asking me like, I wonder if they actually filmed in the Sistine. I was like, they
no, they didn't.
And then they like the wall explodes.
It's all-
Oh yeah, they
I guess
definitely
that
did.
would-
Yeah.
AI can
Is that what
do a
your dad's
lot.
done?
AI can do
Yeah.
a lot of things these days.
What's pretty?
They actually
impressive.
built a.
That's what I read. I googled it right when we were watching it because I was like, you're not allowed.
I mean, you're not. I mean, I was just there this past summer. You're not allowed to even
We
take
were there just like
cameras.
last year, and yeah.
Yeah.
But there were people
No
doing
photo-
it.
no photo-
everywhere.
no
I was
No
trying to
photo,
be.
no photo.
I was trying to be very, and I saw people like.
Same
The
here.
thing that I was most upset about was
Like,
people were just talking.
people were
They,
yapping. and
Yeah.
they gave you the whole rundown before, and then
Like,
you go
please
and
be
everyone
quiet. You
just
walk in.
starts-
No.
Yeah, you have to kind of get used to the big cathedrals in Europe too,
Yeah.
because these are not only places of worship, which they are, but they're also like just massive
Yeah.
museums for the public too, who aren't especially reverent. And
That did annoy me. So I was like,
Yeah,
shut your trap. I'm trying
Yeah.
to look.
Americans, Germans, Northern Europe,
We're
they're
so
all kind
loud.
of rule
so
followers.
Oh, yeah.
All the other cultures,
Americans are rule followers?
more than most other cultures. Yes.
Asians.
Asians.
It's the Asians.
Mhm.
Sorry.
Well, and the prohibition against
It
voting.
is.
We didn't
It is.
even a.
When we were in Versailles, it was like, body you out of the way.
I mean,
Little
there's-
Asian women like.
Yeah, there's no orderly on your way to mass, line by line. No, it's a mad dash to
No.
whoever gets there first. That was an eye opener too.
They were bodying
That's what
us.
elbow you.
Yeah. Also, I didn't know how fast you could say the Our Father during mass until you go to
That was the
Ireland.
one I
And yeah, I mean it is. I mean you can't keep up. It's like, there's no reverence here. Wow.
This Fiji film paid to do the restoration of the Sistine Chapel, and so they have a 10-year, 20-year, whatever. They could be the only ones to reproduce.
I didn't know that either.
the-
Oh my goodness.